Ed and Lorraine Warren were well-known paranormal investigators and demonologists, hailing from New England, and could count the likes of Amityville and Enfield London hauntings as some of their most famous case studies. The Warrens set up the New England Society for Psychic Research, or NESPR for short, in 1952 and created the Warrens Occult Museum for the haunted and cursed artifacts that accrued over the years, including the infamous Raggedy Ann doll called Annabelle within their residence. While the Warrens had been battling skeptics about creating hoaxes from their famous cases, more so than putting their lives warding off demonic entities, their accumulated knowledge in dealing with demonic possessions or malevolent hauntings could never be slighted. Despite the controversy behind the validity of the Amityville haunting, the 1979 film Amityville Horror would create a frightening niche in the horror scene. From the last count, there were like 20 films that adopted the Amityville prefix to milk on the source material. The first time Ed and Lorraine were represented on screen was the made-for-TV movie The Haunted, about the small haunting which also was the basis of the Conjuring Last Rites in 1991. The Warrens' legacy was going to be immortalized with the movie from New Line Cinema and Warner Brothers in 2013's The Conjuring, as KK is hyping up for Last Rites, which spelled the end of Ed and Lorraine's travails against demonic threats in the Conjuring franchise. I will be doing a full franchise review of the 3 Conjuring movies building up to the final movie, without the spun-off features of Annabelle and Valak the Nun. Producer Tony DeRosa Grant had planned for a film treatment since the late 1990s of the haunting of Perron family from Rhode Island in the 1970s, who sought help from Ed and Lorraine Warren. DeRosa Grant found an ally in producer Peter Safran from Warner Brothers and had twin brothers Chad and Carrie Hayes to work on a screenplay with the story told from the point of view of the Warrens after they have done extensive interviews of the couple prior to writing the script. Ultimately, Australian horror director James Wan, responsible for the success of the Saw franchise and had just started another horror franchise in 2010 with Insidious, was engaged as the director. The Conjuring started with a prologue, which had a meaningful tatters to the main story arc. In the late 1960s, a pair of young nurses had been haunted by a doll who they thought was possessed by their friend Annabelle, which was the name bestowed to the cursed doll. We all knew the zeitgeist of the doll had created after this movie and also allowed this Conjuring shared universe to slowly build brick by brick. We went into the main body of the movie with the Perrons moving into their spacious abode on Rhode Island, which the father acquired from a bank auction, which he hoped to allow his 5 daughters to grow up happily in. Things could not be any more different for the Perrons when the haunting got serially scary and life-threatening. A demon by the name of Bathsheba had the target marked on the mother Caroline, and the possession had a sinister motive to get to the children. The story ran parallel to the Warrens' own daughter, Judy, in perils due to the ominous nature of a new item in their artifact collection. The Perrons' haunting was nothing too different from a classic like Poltergeist, and what James Wan and his writing team displayed on screen was also not too different from what he had just did with a movie like Insidious. However, it was that mood that he stirred up and the production values like the house and the landscape, like when Vera Farmiga's Lorraine spotted the hanging body behind Patrick Wilson's Ed in the creepy tree outside the house. The predicament faced by the Perrons, especially with the youngest children's, as a bait was always going to lure the audience in, as well as triggering reactions from many viewers. I thought the casting of the likes of Ron Livingston and Lily Taylor as the parents of the Perron household worked a splendor. The mother felt like a strong character who was willing to go the extra yard to fight against any adversity for her daughters, while the father was the classic suburban type who toiled for the family and did not shrug off any responsibility, since he was the one who bought the ill-fated house and devoted all his savings into it. James Wan was a seasoned hand in the world of horror filmmaking by this point and knew when to execute the jump scares to trigger that instant fright and goosebumps-raising reactions. 2 instances were always emblazoned in my memory since I first watched the movie. Firstly, the phantom clap in the basement, and then the demon crouching on the top of the wardrobe were effective to scare me on the rewatch. In short, audiences might be able to anticipate scares from a distance, but it was still immaculate and effective to say the very least. I think I've mentioned somewhere before that I enjoyed a team of paranormal investigators in a concerted effort to to find out the haunting bothering the family, synonymous with the boys and Lin Shaye's character in the Insidious franchise. The Warrens had Drew, who will be a recurring character in the franchise, and I found the character competent in his investigative work, and his appearance in these movies were always reassuring for the audiences. The bulky Brett, who was the policeman who was joining the case, had his moments and was a nice addition to the crew. From the first movie, it was apparent that Lorraine, with her clairvoyance and innate ability to transcend into the deadly situations in uncovering the truth, was always going to be the protagonist, and Farmiga's performance in the role was hard to nitpick. Ed Warren, though, felt like an afterthought in the first movie, but in a patriarchal society back in the 1960s, he was still pushed into the front and center, even having to do an exorcism when he was ill-qualified for. The casting of Patrick Wilson also felt like a sticking point after Insidious, and his association with James Wan. But slowly, the natural rapport and chemistry Wilson and Farmiga built in the sequels were there for all to see, like creating spin-off IP in prologues. The part of collecting artifacts into the occult museum as the bookend was another aspect I loved. The musical score added a lot to the mood, and Joseph Bishara was the right man to go for, especially he had collaborated with Wan, again in Insidious, and Bishara was also a creature actor, assuming the role of the demon Bathsheba. The Conjuring earned over $300 million on its theatrical run globally, and I remembered it was one of the few rare horror movies I had the initiative to seek out for during those days when I would steer off horror flicks with a 10-foot pole. The movie still held up as a well-made movie and instrumental for the building of a franchise that New Line, the producers, and James Wan did not envision to foster. I'm giving The Conjuring a solid 9 out of 10, even as a rewatch. The Conjuring II was released in June 2016 with a lot of pomp and circumstances with the unprecedented success of the original movie. It began with the Amityville haunting, which had to be touched upon, being the most famous and most visited case of the Warrens. The prologue with the Warrens going to an arduous seance when Lorraine was looking for answers with the perpetrator of the haunting, Ronald DeFeo Jr., but it felt like something more sinister was at play, and a premonition was played out that petrified Lorraine with the life of her loved one at stake. Across the Atlantic Ocean, divorced mother Peggy Hodgson was making ends meet to keep herself and most importantly her 4 kids afloat in the creaky 2-story terrace house in Enfield, London, England, while having to work her socks off and dealing with disciplinary issues her daughter Janet had incurred at school, or keeping youngest boy Billy from being serially bullied with his stuttering was not trivial. The incremental poltergeist activities in their house was the last straw that broke the camel's back in terms of her sanity. When Hodgson's claim of the house being haunted was being backed up by even the visiting police constables, attracting the attention of local news media and celebrity parapsychologists who will enlist the help of the Warrens for investigation in order to gather evidence for spiritual assistance from the Vatican. Like in the first Conjuring, the house played a major role to escalate the dreariness and felt like an environment to vex unsuspecting occupants. The Enfield house was stripped bare with antiquated and suspicious furniture which the entity would use to freak out the victims. Janet was the prime suspect of the haunting and slowly became a conduit of the malevolent spirit stubbornly hoarding the house. The scary disturbances Janet had endured, as well as the main interview session when the entity Bill took over her consciousness, it was truly skin-crawling. That said, there was still a gulf felt between the empathy and other emotions stirred within me with the predicament suffered by the Perrons in the first movie and that of the Hodgsons in part 2. Peggy was mentally unstable with Frances O'Connor putting a stellar performance. Her abrasive nature got to me, but I was still bothered by the part when the plug was pulled from the supposed rendering of assistance could drove anyone up the wall. As we delved into the premonition that Lorraine had with regards to Ed's fate, it further bolstered the fact that the husband was going to be the second fiddle and hindered Lorraine's process when she had to be constantly vigilant about his safety. Like Annabelle, the movie also successfully provided a lead-in to another IP with Valak the Demonic Nun, which spun off her own successful movie franchise and generated related merchandise no less inferior to Annabelle. The scene in the study with Valak portrait coming alive was always going to frighten me sufficiently to make me pee a little. The other key jump scare came in the form of the crooked man with the zoetrope belonging to Billy, was another effective artifact to set the scares in more than one occasion. James Wan returned to the directing chair and wrote the story with the Hayes twins, but David Leslie Johnson reworked the screenplay. Joseph Bishara returned for the music and was also involved in the role of the demon. The change of scenery to the struggling lower class of England being debilitated by a haunting that played with the minds of people in a shrewd way made this sequel an effective one for the franchise. The scares were highly memorable again, and bringing Varlock as a demon baiting on Lorraine as a through line from Amityville to Enfield might felt like something forcibly concocted for the movie, but it worked in terms of storytelling in an entertaining manner. The Conjuring II is an 8 out of 10 for me. The second sequel, subtitled The Devil Made Me Do It, was in development straight after The Conjuring II, but was very much disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. However, filming actually started prior to the pandemic, and by this point, without James Wan as director, and without story from Chad and Carrie Hayes, David Leslie Johnson held the sole story accolade, and Michael Chaves, one of Wan's prodigies like Gary Doberman, and had directed solely films under the Conjuring extended universe like The Curse of La Llorona, and later on The Nun 2 and The Conjuring Last Rites, who assumed the role as the director of this movie. It was pretty blatant from the get-go that the structure motif of the earlier films had been changed in The Devil Made Me Do It. There was a prologue with the Warrens dealing with a demonic possession, this time round something chronically debilitating poor 8-year-old David Glatzel in Brookfield, Connecticut. Just as the Warrens and the Glatzels thought they had the upper hand with the demonic possession, the demon would entrap David in his room in a memorable sequence, leading to the heart-pounding showdown when there was a transfer of possession, something that felt very fantastical, which also led to the health ailments that would bother Ed Warren. This was based on the trial of Arnie Cheyenne Johnson in 1981, when he stabbed his landlord Alan Bono 22 times and been charged with the first-degree manslaughter. The trial was the first known case in US in which the defense sought to prove innocence based upon the claim of demonic possession, and was known as The Devil Made Me Do It case, thus the subtitle of this movie. Arnie was the boyfriend of young David's sister, Debbie, who was helping out during the exorcism process and was an emotional anchor for the boy who looked up to him. He was at the end of the demonic transfer, leading him into a hallucinatory mode, seeing themes that very much detached from reality and eventually the crime that he had committed. The movie was skewered in a weird way that Arnie was showing more concern to David more than his own sister, which naturally he would be the prime target for the demon to latch upon. And when Arnie was entrenched in his legal tussles and the battle against the unseen threat, Debbie became overzealous in her aid to her boyfriend. Debbie was played by Sarah Catherine Hook, who was much more reserved in The White Lotus Season 3 as the daughter of Jason Isaacs' rich man character. With the Warrens being roped in to help Arnie with his case, it became a police procedural as the couple went around to seek expert help with a witch totem that linked the Glatzels case with another mysterious disappearance within the vicinity in Connecticut. This led to the Warrens to a retired priest played by John Noble, who was Denethor, the steward of Gondor from the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and Dr. Bishop from the TV series Fringe. Noble's character Kastner would be crucial for the unraveling of the serial witchcraft in the region, leading to young people being targeted for possession. The final showdown when Ed and Lorraine found the lair of the perpetrator, juxtaposing with Arnie's final sacrificial ceremony in the infirmary of the prison, was an exciting culmination to an otherwise lesser product in the Conjuring series. The movie though felt like an ode to the love between our protagonists as they reminiscence their time when they first met in the 1950s, and by this point, audiences were getting comfortable with Wilson and Farmiga as an on-screen couple who had seamless chemistry while battling demons were just their way to express their affection to one another. There was also that rare moment of levity showcased by Lorraine during her interaction with the police department, who sought her help in exchange for their information with regards to the evidence to help Arnie's trial. Lorraine, of course, would always be at the brunt of the most frightening ordeal, and we could see as a character she had grown more resilient as I emphasized her being the lead character, especially with Ed now stifled with health issues. The Devil Made Me Do It was streamed on HBO Max in 2021 in conjunction with a release in the theatre, as a concerted effort by streaming platforms in an attempt to keep people indoors to reduce unnecessary spread of the virus in the theatres. Box office earning definitely dealt a blow, but still earned a respectable $200 million at a $39 million budget. For director Michael Chaves, it was easy for him to make a solid horror movie under the learning tree of James Wan, and there were enough evidence he did not follow blindly to the way to tell a story like Wan. Although like a TV series, there was a strict guideline to keep the aesthetic within a successful franchise. The Devil Made Me Do It was at least something different, as the team continued to work on some of the most eye-catching cases from the Warrens, and it was a 7 out of 10 for me. When Tony Spera, Judy Warren's boyfriend, asked Ed Warren how many paranormal investigations the Warrens had done in Last Rites, he replied close to 1,000. Even with the handful of the most well-known cases being touched upon in the earlier Conjuring films, there was still a reservoir of knowledge and experience to draw from the Warrens for more material in this franchise. But as the couple was getting on in age, and Ed's ailing health in The Devil Made Me Do It, their chapter in their onerous journey to resolve the unknown forces certainly was coming to an end, which also made the fourth Conjuring a timely conclusion to the franchise. 5 years after the Arne Johnson trial, a family in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, known as the Smalls, were celebrating the confirmation of their second daughter, Heather. Grandma Small would purchase a well-ornated standing mirror from a flea market as a gift. From the night the mirror, with a glaring huge crack, which the Smalls were oblivious to, disregarding it as a red flag, arrived into their abode, things started unraveling to the entire family of 8. Oh yeah, the incessant barking of the otherwise docile golden retriever was not a sign as well. It was apparent the creaky house in the middle of an industrial town, where heavy rig truck would shake the foundation on daily basis, was in a dire need of a lot of rejuvenation and repair. But having a fluorescent tube falling from the ceiling for no apparent reason felt like something unnatural. Strange occurrences and ghostly apparitions would be felt by every single member of the family. As audiences, the travails were very convenient to draw cathartic gaps and some well-designed sequences to get momentous goosebumps risings. Meanwhile, the Warrens were in their retirement tourney, giving lectures or seminars to poor reception in colleges. Their daughter Judy was put into prominence since the first movie. Judy had fallen in love with an ex-cop Tony, and things were getting serious between the pair. Despite being a protective father like most would over their only child, more notably a precious princess, Ed Warren had been apprehensive over this new man in his daughter's life. He felt like the power that Lorraine harnessed, which proved to be a bane more than a help, had been passed down genetically to Judy, and there was that staunch resistance from the mother to teach the daughter to utilize it to her advantage. The Warrens would be informed of the wretched predicaments of the Smalls, but they were determined not to go back to the field and felt that the church would be more suitable to help with the resolution. Little did they know that this malevolent haunting of the Smalls, and especially the mirror, was a remnant of their forgotten past, or at least something they wanted to forget, and it was a well-set plan to complete the sacrifice the demon yearned for since many decades ago. So a series of circumstances would lead the Warrens to the Smalls, now be swamped by unwanted media attention, which helped little in terms of them soliciting the right assistance, and we have a manic showdown that will put every single person in grave danger as the threat escalated to the nadir of the final film. In a story written by screenwriter David Leslie Johnson from the preceding Conjuring movies, and reworked by Ian Gilbert and Richard Nine, there were a lot of liberty taken to rewrite history and dramatizing the chain of true events which might have little correlation to one another. For a start, it was stated that Judy was born in the year 1964 in the movie, but in real life she was born in the year 1950. While it was true that she and her husband would take over the occult museum, there was little information of her joining Tony in paranormal investigations and herself being clairvoyant. She had been shunning media spotlight as much as she could. I like the fact that The Conjuring was a spot of a biographical evaluation of the Warrens as people and, more importantly, a family. Earlier movies showed Lorraine as the heart and soul of the team, and the ode to the love between Ed and Lorraine in Part 3 and it nicely tied up with the relationship the couple had with their only daughter, whom she had been physically absent for a large part of her childhood due to the nature of their work. Judy Warren was played by British actress Mia Tomlinson, who looked like a younger Zooey Deschanel without the crazy sapphire eyes. Built such an easy rapport with Wilson and Farmiga, and the parental love they displayed was so earnest through the tumultuous journey, especially Judy was evidently being targeted. Tony, played by Ben Hardy, whom I might remotely recognize as Archangel in X-Men Apocalypse, felt like a concerted effort as a character for the franchise to pass the baton to. Especially in reality, he also took over the trade and the caretakership of the museum. Our introduction to the character felt like this was someone trying to intrude the Warrens' household, asking a lot of questions like he was probing into some unspoken secrets. But his inclusion in the final showdown, especially in the glaring absence of Shannon Cook's Drew, and the story why he quitted the force, as well as the effort to build a relationship with Ed Warren, like the father of the bride, we were warming up to the prospective son-in-law. However, it felt like it would still be a massive gap for Tomlinson and Hardy to cross if they were to convince fans of the franchise that they were to take over Patrick Wilson and Farrah Farmiga. Speaking of which, Wilson oozed charisma despite being an old man with heart problems. He balanced comedic chops when needed and held his own in some of the demonic showdown, worlds apart from the first movie when he was forced to conduct the exorcism. Farrah Farmiga was always the MVP of the series, and her eyes was constantly filled with compassion. Much more than the real Lorraine Warren, who felt like a cold, aloof person on the surface. Lorraine was positioning as a voice of reason here, to shield her husband on unnecessary strain to his body, while as a guardian and teacher to Judy throughout the film. The only thing I will remember of the Schmoes will always be the big glasses most of them will be wearing. There will be no comparison with these characters to Penny and her kids from Part 2, and surely not with the Perrons, who I would always held in high regards as victims of demonic threat in the entire franchise. Anyway, all of the characters made their appearances at the end like their Avengers Endgame moment. As mentioned, I wanted Drew to be featured more than just a party guest, but I understood the decision to push Judy and Tony as the main side characters. Father Gordon, played by Steve Coulter, who acted as a facilitator between the Warrens and the church, will play a key role in this movie. To be truthful, at 135 minutes runtime, the movie certainly felt bloated, with the haunting and the molding of side characters like Judy and Tony took equal amount of time. The haunting will always be crucial to effectively scare the audience, before a short reprieve in between, before building up to the final showdown. I certainly understand the whole familiar setting for the Warrens is crucial for the movie, even if it might get a bit long in the tooth. That though afforded us the bridal gown scene, which took the urban legend of a ghost portal when mirrors facing each other created a long chain of refraction. In fact, the movie also used a lot of tropes and taboos in horror movies, especially with the basement and the attic. Director Michael Chaves created a memorable climatic showdown with some amazing camera work, likely via computer manipulation to bring the audience through another roller coaster ride. It also successfully made a mirror with an innocuous frame carvings that felt like a prop from the movie The Haunting with Liam Neeson, Catherine Zeta-Jones and Owen Wilson as a scary horror character. Other creepy manifestations worked in well and did not overstay their welcome, and there was a brilliant tie-up with the threat Judy had been haunted since her childhood coming back for a major scare. I did not appreciate the few moments of foreshadowing like in the Final Destination movies. It felt a bit unnecessary. It felt like early reactions and reviews have been mixed, which was similar to the people who have caught the movie with. Personally, it was not hard to have reverence to the first two movies in the franchise, which came from director James Wan. Whether that was coincidental or not, but by this point, the creative team had went through multiple iterations, and perhaps the passion and creativity were diluted as well. It was still a good end to the franchise, which by now words has been spreading for a TV series and more movies in the extended universe. It felt less and less likely to be the case of an end of a series. I wonder there would be an exquisitely trimmed down version of Last Rites, but for now, this is a 7.5 out of 10 for me. Another hefty review, another hefty amount of effort from yours truly, so please help me to click the like button and help spread the word of my channel and subscribe to it if you have not. My previous review was on a strange alien adoption feature, Descendants by director Peter Salella, We shared a bit of that parental heartaches of a childbirth not going smoothly in Last Rites. As I discussed with my watching party, I would be interested to see a snippet of all the demons having a communal shawarma inside the occult museum, like that in the Toy Story, but with demons.